Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Nicole, the Portfolio Director at REDF, and I'm happy to host today's webinar today and share a little bit more about you with this fantastic funding opportunity that we have available right now. I'll start with just a minute of introduction about REDF. We're a California-based financial intermediary, and we believe that the opportunity to work should be available to everyone, everywhere. Our mission is to create jobs and employment opportunities for people facing barriers to work. The way that we do this is by investing in social enterprises that are creating jobs and employment opportunities for people who want to work but have high barriers that get in the way of them getting a job. These barriers might include things like former incarceration, former homelessness, mental disability, being a disconnected youth, but these people want to work, they just need someone to give them a chance. We provide philanthropic grants and technical assistance to organizations who build, run, and grow the social enterprises that directly create these jobs.
Before we dive into the overview of the program, we'd like to address a few housekeeping items. Please feel free to submit your questions using the chat box throughout the presentation. Questions will be answered in the order received toward the end of the call. All logistical questions will be managed immediately by myself, Natasha McLaughlin. If you are dialing in only and do not have access to a computer, you can submit questions to SIF2015@redf.org. Again, that's SIF2015@redf.org. After today's meeting, we will upload the PowerPoint presentation, webinar, and the frequently asked questions on redf.org as soon as possible.
Thanks, Natasha. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about REDF and our grant-making style. We'll go through what we see the benefits to grantees are, and then we'll talk a little bit about the results of our current portfolio. We'll talk then about what we're looking for in the next portfolio, and finally answer your questions. To give you a sense of who your speakers are today, I mentioned that I'm Nicole, the Portfolio Director. You just heard a moment ago from Natasha McLaughlin, our Programs Coordinator, and we'll also hear in a few minutes from Karen Chern, our Portfolio Manager. One of the ways I think is best to explain REDF's work is to talk about the organizations that we invest in. And so we wanted to take a minute to show you our current and our past portfolio. At the bottom, you'll see our portfolio, what we call our alumni portfolio, organizations such as JUMA, Rubicon Programs, San Francisco Conservation Corps. And then above, you see our Social Innovation Fund portfolio from our 2010 Social Innovation Fund Award. You can see that there's a wide variety in the actual types of businesses that we've invested in. We've invested in street cleaning, maintenance, pest control, general contracting, staffing businesses, concessionaires, et cetera, recycling and conservation, screen printing, the list goes on. What really the similarity between these businesses is that they all employ people such as people who were formerly incarcerated, formerly homeless, people who suffer from addiction or mental health disabilities, or young people who have dropped out of school or been in gangs. We just wanted to highlight for you our results to date in brief, and these results were accomplished by that list of portfolio organizations you saw a moment ago. Through the current month, REDF's organizations, our social enterprises that we've invested in, have employed over 10,000 people. These social enterprises have generated over $150 million in earned revenue. And it's been a combined total of 60 social enterprises and business lines. We've been awarded 2 Social Innovation Fund grants now with a combined funding potential for $25 million. We'll be telling you a little bit more about both of those awards later in this webinar. Moving right along, I want to talk now about REDF's approach to grant making. We describe ourselves as Venture Philanthropy Plus. Venture philanthropy meaning it's a grant-making style similar to investing in a startup business with high growth potential. Venture philanthropy includes things, of course, like funding, which is very important, but it also includes intensive due diligence, tailored technical assistance. Usually it's a long-term relationship, at least 3 to 5 years, where we're helping you build your enterprise. We want to be building a business that has an effective support system for the enterprise workers. It's really a hands-on, trust-based relationship, and we really try to facilitate networks wherever possible to increase the connections and the opportunities available to your organization. But then there's a plus component, which is a little bit different than a standard kind of investment model in venture capital. These are other activities that we do to benefit the portfolio organizations and to help build the field at large. So some examples of those other activities: as a social innovation fund grantee, we're now a government financial intermediary. We also increasingly engage in policy and advocacy work, trying to identify local, state, and federal policies that would help support the workers that we're trying to help stay employed. We also increasingly invest in research and tools. One of those things is REDFworkshop.org, which is an online learning platform for social entrepreneurs who would like to start social enterprises to employ people with barriers. And we're continuing to research and understand best practices in the field and try to disseminate those learnings through REDF.org as well as REDFworkshop.org. Where possible, we also like to try to broker contracts to help bring business to social enterprises. And we also play a role of convener. Sometimes that's a convener just of the organizations in our portfolio or our alumni portfolio and our current portfolio. Sometimes it's convening just larger leaders in the field. At REDF, the things that we give dollars for, the things that we fund, largely fall into two categories: social costs and business costs. We think of an employment-focused social enterprise as a double bottom-line business, and we invest in both lines of that business. We don't restrict our funding to one or the other. On the social side, those costs that you might seek funding for, any kind of social supports that you offer to your social enterprise employees, job training components, job placement support to help them transition out into a permanent job elsewhere, and costs that you may incur to strengthen someone's career pathway potential. So whether that's OSHA training or a guard card or a ServSafe certification, forklift training, connections to GED systems, et cetera, anything that you're undertaking to increase someone's earning potential in the long run that a normal business wouldn't necessarily pay for, those are things that we like to support. And social supports can include a lot of things for barrier removal, whether that's just making sure people have a uniform and correct shoes to start their job with, making sure that people have, making sure that just a few $100s isn't going to stand in the way of someone getting their license back, their driver's license back. And it also can be things that even just help, supports that help people connect to food support systems and transportation assistance. On the business side, of course, we're investing in growing the business because growing the business is what creates jobs, and creating those jobs is what helps us to employ more people annually. But we also do recognize that growth requires capacity to scale. So, of course, we, will invest in sometimes, fixed assets, but also just internal capacity and infrastructure that you need to scale. We've done a lot of investments in different technology systems that increase an organization's ability to serve at scale. We have frequently funded new or expanded lines of business for existing social enterprises. That's always of interest to us. And generally speaking, anything that will help create additional jobs. We like to think that all of our portfolio organizations have a really great variety of resources available to them. So here's some of the things that we would like to highlight to you as you consider whether or not being in the REDF portfolio would be a good fit for you. So of course we provide grants. We'll talk a little bit more about this later, but our model generally means that we want to make significant grants on an annual basis for a long-term period of 3 to 5 years. Grants generally range between, from $100,000 a year to $350,000 a year. There can be a significant range depending on the size and needs of the organization. We also do a lot of business assistance. That's that tailored technical assistance that we provide for portfolio organizations. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about the types of business assistance our portfolio is able to access. We provide monthly venture committee meetings. A venture committee meeting is a meeting between your staff at REDF and your organization. We review progress against goals. We're looking at how many people you've employed year to date, how many job slots you have currently, and your retention statistics, how many, what is the churn currently, or why are people leaving the social enterprise for good reasons or for bad. We'll review the enterprise financials and any operational data you have for us, and we'll go through any business assistance projects that we have currently in the works. Overall, this is really your meeting as the grantee. It's your time to help share with us the things that you're struggling with, the things where we could potentially bring resources to bear, the things where you'd like some help thinking through. We want to hear what's wrong, what's not working, and not just what's going well. So we like to think of it as, this is really not just your standard funder meeting. We really want to focus on problem solving and not report outs. In addition to that, we also have MBA interns and fellows that work for REDF, really located at the portfolio organizations. Our internship program is called the Farber Intern Program. It's usually for MBA students in between their first and second year, and portfolio organizations can have one of these Farber interns embedded at their organization for 10 weeks in the summer. We've heard actually repeatedly from our portfolio that access to these Farber interns has been one of the most valuable, beneficial things that they've gotten out of being in the REDF portfolio. These interns generally are just really, really high caliber talent that bring an infusion of capacity into the organization for a limited time. And actually at REDF, we have a couple individuals who we have hired on as staff after being in the Farber intern program. Karen Chern, our portfolio manager, who you'll hear from later, was a Farber intern a few years ago. We also bring business advisors to bear. We'll help you find or help you fund someone that you've identified who you think would be a good business advisor to your organization. We like to provide knowledge sharing resources. We'll help you identify a coach or a mentor as needed. And that's not just necessarily for the SE director. It could be for your employee support staff, or it could be for your frontline supervisors who are working directly with your social enterprise staff on the ground. We also provide support in doing social outcome measurement. So I'm going to talk now a little bit more about the types of business assistance that we provide and who provides it. So business assistance is usually provided by a couple of different sources. It can be from portfolio staff. At REDF, we have a portfolio director, but we also have 2 portfolio managers, and we'll be adding to that number, and we also have senior associates and associates. Each organization in the portfolio has a dedicated portfolio manager and a portfolio associate or senior associate that serves as their dedicated program officer and helps lead business assistance and technical assistance projects. We also use a number of consultants to do work. We have a number of consultants that we work with all the time who have really great deep expertise in certain areas that are of interest to social enterprises. But we also will fund the consultant that you bring to us. If there's a consultant that you identify that you want to provide some business assistance, we frequently will work with consultants that you've identified. And of course, I mentioned the Farber interns and fellows. They're a really great source of business assistance. So I tried to bucket a couple examples. We've done so much business assistance over the years, but here's a couple things that are really common. On the employee support side, we've done a lot really helping to design, what does the job look like? What's the overall program design look like? How often do you do performance reviews? What's the format of that performance reviews? How do you provide feedback informally? How do you recruit for individuals coming into the program? How do you do a job readiness assessment? What does that job readiness assessment look like before they leave? How do they manage to access the supports, the case managers, et cetera? At what point should they be receiving things like resume training and interview practice, et cetera? We also do a lot on the business side, business development, sales development, contracts and procurement, sales strategies. Of course, we've had a lot of organizations that are focusing on new business lines and new social enterprises. So there's quite a lot of assistance that goes in that bucket, whether it's a feasibility analysis of a new business idea, doing some market research or market testing to see what the demand for that would be or what the competitive landscape looks like. We've also helped organizations put together marketing strategies, plans, and materials. And as a new business launches, we'll, of course, either do kind of like pilot testing of a new business line before a full launch. We can design and help with that, and also ongoing break-even analyses to understand how a new business is performing. On the reporting side, we certainly like to help organizations build and institutionalize reporting systems that they'll have long after REDF is gone, whether it's a performance dashboard, whether it might be presenting and preparing double bottom line financials, or even just revising their internal enterprise information systems. I'm going to switch now to telling you a little bit about our current portfolio. This portfolio will sunset in early 2015. The first grants out of this portfolio were made in April 2015, April 2011. This was our first Social Innovation Fund award, which at that time was a new federal grant focused on scaling proven social innovations. It was authorized by the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act of 2009. It created the Social Innovation Fund. The Social Innovation Fund program selects intermediaries. They don't make grants to local on-the-ground direct service organizations. They ultimately want to support those organizations, but they do it by funding intermediaries. REDF was one of the first intermediaries selected back in 2010. There were 15 others. It was a very competitive program. And then we had to run a very open competitive program that at that time was focused only on California. And we selected 10 subgrantees who you saw on the portfolio page. And then they utilize those subgrants. So we're passing through money from the Social Innovation Fund, and in some cases our own funds, to our portfolio of subgrantees. We received $7.5 million for that first portfolio, and we augmented it with additional dollars on our end to provide grants as well. Our goal was to employ low-income California residents. We set a goal of 2,500 people employed by 2015, and that 70% would remain employed for 1 year or later. So how did we do? Here's some brief results from our 2010 Social Innovation Fund portfolio. Well, as of July, we've employed 2,585 people. We hit that 2,500 number by February, with still a year left of operations. So we'll be surpassing the 3,000 mark for sure. So we hit that goal, and are so thankful to our portfolio organizations who did that work. We also did the Mathematica job study, and from that study, it looked at the outcomes of the social enterprises across a variety of models, and said what was the outcome for individuals, what was the change in their self-sufficiency, their housing stability, their economic safety, etc. We saw better overall well-being. Both employees and staff reported that the social enterprises provided valuable work experience and training opportunities to a hard-to-employ population. We saw increased housing stability. The percent owning or renting a home increased by 253%. Monthly income improved. Monthly income increased and substance abuse fell while people were employed in the social enterprise. Overall, there was a 268% increase in income, and income from government benefits dropped from 71% of their income prior to social enterprise employment down to 24% of total income after social enterprise employment. And only 4% of workers reported an arrest while working at a social enterprise. More than 50% of employees were still working at the social enterprise or had left for outside employment or training at about 6 months after they were hired. And in our impact study, 56% hired by social enterprises had jobs 1 year later, compared to 37% who only received support services. So in other words, in one particular organization where we did a quasi-experimental design study, we compared a control group, or a comparison group, which received workforce support services but not social enterprise employment. And then we looked at a treatment group that received those services, had harder to serve demographics, but also received social enterprise employment. And that group with the more difficult to serve characteristics was statistically significantly more likely to be employed 1 year later than the group that was, quote, easier to serve but received only the supports. I'm going to pass it to Karen Chern now, who's going to walk us through the 2016 SIF portfolio opportunity.
Thank you, Nicole. So we've talked a lot about REDF's past work, but now looking towards the future and what our goals are with our new round of SIF funding, I want to sort of set the stage a little bit with some background information. From 1997 to 2010, we really focused our work in the Bay Area and investing in social enterprises within the Bay Area. With the first SIF award, which we were really excited about, we were actually able to increase our reach down to Southern California, as well as double down on investments in Northern California. So we expanded across California, but haven't had the opportunity yet to go national. Our goal with the 2016 to 2020 Social Innovation Fund grant is to expand nationally. This support will allow us to increase our portfolio across geographies across the nation, not just in California, and we're really excited about this. Some of our goals in this new Social Innovation Fund grant round are bucketable by 3 different things: job creation, geographic expansion, and cohort development. To start with the job creation aspect, our goal for this round of funding with this portfolio is to employ 7,500 individuals cumulatively over 2016 to 2020. This isn't the total number of jobs REDF is aiming to create over the same time period. Through other programs we'll be working on in parallel, we'll be aiming to create more jobs, but for the Social Innovation Fund grant, our goal is 7,500 jobs. So what does that mean for each of the groups in our portfolio? Depending on the size of our portfolio, on average, we're expecting to see about 75 to 100 individuals employed per subgrantee per year. And we recognize that most groups aren't going to come in at that level, and it's really with the Social Innovation Fund investment that they'll grow, and what we're hoping to see is that the average across the 5 years ends up being about 75 to 100 per year, but we recognize that in the beginning it may be lower and it will grow over time. And of course, we really are aiming to create sustainable job growth. We're not trying to create jobs just for these 5 years. We want to see social enterprises thrive and able to sustain these jobs in the long term. And so a lot of what our investment focuses on is how to get groups sustainably running and able to support these jobs and continue to grow them over beyond 2020. A big shift in our strategy for this year, or for this round of funding, is really this geographic expansion piece. So we're expanding within California also, so we're going to continue to strengthen our Bay Area and Southern California clusters and ecosystems. And then we're also aiming to add 4 to 6 additional geographic clusters in other areas across the country. We currently have what we're considering 3 priority geographies of the West, Midwest, and the South, but this is really built around the high-touch model that Nicole described earlier, and the fact that we are very hands-on and we spend a lot of face time with our groups. And so we listed regions that we felt were conducive to us being able to maintain that level of contact with our grantees. However, if you're not in the priority geographies, you are still eligible to apply for this round of funding. And our overall goal really is to put together the best possible portfolio. And so if we get a lot of really strong applications that are not necessarily in one of the priority geographies, we would still consider them. And in addition, we do have other sources of funding, as we mentioned, that will feed into our other larger goals, and so that's another way to get considered. The other piece is cohort development. We're anticipating around 18 to 25 organizations in this new portfolio with this set of funding, and that may vary, but what we've sort of discovered is that it's really beneficial if social enterprises are in a geographic cluster, so they have some sort of ecosystem and connection to other social enterprises in the area, and the area is really ripe for supporting social enterprise. And so what we're aiming to do is create investments in certain geographic clusters, and that will enable our invested social enterprises to share learnings and practices, connect with other portfolio alumni, and maintain really strong connections for supporting and growing the social enterprise field. So now to get down to the selection process. I'm not going to go into exhaustive detail in this call, but I do want to point everyone to the website. If you go to redf.org, you can click on the link that talks about the new funding and find your way to a pretty exhaustive selection plan document that will provide a lot of detail about that. So I highly encourage everyone read that before applying. But as an overview to the process, there are 4 different stages of application, and I do want to highlight that the only stage of the application process that is completely open to anyone to apply is this letter of intent stage. The deadline is coming up on September 18th, and this is a short narrative that will help us understand if groups are meeting minimum eligibility requirements, and then also better understand what their program is and what they're proposing and the growth that they're hoping to see in their social enterprise. All the stages after the letter of intent stage, so the request for proposals, the RFP stage, the deep screen, and the trial phase, all of those are invite only. And so if you are selected to move on to each stage, you'll be issued an invite. Otherwise, you don't need to worry about each of the different stages. Although for the RFP, it is a pretty in-depth application, so we did try to keep the letter of intent fairly simple and easy to fill out, but the RFP is a much more rigorous process, a much heavier lift. If you see the last row here, the applicant workload is significantly higher for the RFP stage than for the LOI. And so we do encourage groups to, and you'll see that the deadline is pretty tight for turnaround. It's October 16th for the RFP, and we're issuing invitations on September 25th. So we do encourage groups to think about maybe setting aside some time on their calendars to be able to prepare for that in the event that they are invited to apply for the RFP stage. But just to give you a sense of the rest of the timeline, deep screens will be conducted starting November 20th. The trial phase, which is just a chance to work like one-on-one with the groups and work on work style fit and goal setting and work planning and determining whether or not there's a good relationship there. That happens starting January 11th. And the deep screen stage is really a chance for us to get more questions answered and go in depth based on any questions or concerns we have from the RFP stage. We will be announcing our new grantees in early February, and that's when the selection process will conclude. I do want to highlight that initially we had a minimum eligibility criteria of being in operation for a minimum of 3 years, but we've actually elected to remove that criteria. So if you have been in operation for less than 3 years, you are now eligible to apply for this round of funding. I know I went through all of this pretty quickly, so again, if you do have questions or concerns, you certainly raise them in the chat box, but you'll find a lot of detail in the selection document on our website. And speaking of which, how do you go about applying? Well, the main way is it has to be done online. So if you go to redf.org/letter-of-intent, you can find the web page that will take you to all the instructions you need to apply for this letter of intent. And you can also navigate there from redf.org. But the first step is really to go to that page, and then you can see a link to the letter of intent form, and that's where you'll actually submit. And everything, like I said, must be submitted online. We will not accept any applications that are emailed in. However, because it is a web-based form and you aren't able to save your progress as you go along, we highly, highly encourage groups to look at and download the PDF version of the letter of intent so that you can see what the questions are in advance and draft them out and guide your answers before going to the actual link to submit your letter of intent. If you scroll down the page, you'll also find a link to our frequently asked questions. We are able to answer questions pretty frequently. We update this list of frequently asked questions every Monday, and that covers the questions that were submitted the previous week. We can't answer organization-specific questions, only questions that apply across multiple different organizations. And it's a pretty exhaustive list right now, so I do highly encourage you, if you have questions, to check out the frequently asked questions page, because it's highly likely that the answers may be there already. But if you do have other questions, please email sif2015@redf.org. You'll also find on this page, if you keep scrolling down, that selection document that I keep mentioning, and again, that has lots of detail on the criteria that should be evaluated against and the process under which the selection plan will take place. And finally, to talk more about questions and the forums you can use to ask questions, we are planning on hosting 2 question and answer webinars. The first one already occurred, but the last one is actually coming up this coming Monday, September 14th at 10 a.m. Pacific. And you can register online on the same website, redf.org/letter-of-intent. And this question and answer webinar is a little bit different from these informational webinars in that we're spending the majority of our time answering questions. So there will be very little presentation. It'll be very much really just a large chunk of time where you'll submit questions again through the chat box, and we'll answer them as we go along. For both of this online webinar, this informational webinar, and the question and answer webinar, everything will be posted on the website afterwards, so if you're not able to attend, you can still listen in or look at the slide document. And then all of the questions from both this webinar and the question and answer webinar will be posted on a revised version of the frequently asked question list online, and that should be up by the end of the day Monday coming up. And as mentioned before, the frequently asked questions are general questions that relate to all applicants, nothing organization specific. I want to highlight again that the questions need to be sent to sif2015@redf.org. That's SIF2015@redf.org. We're not able to answer questions in any other forum other than these public webinars and through the email address. So if you do have any questions, please send us an email. And at the end of this webinar, we will be posting these slides and an updated FAQ. And now I think we have some time to open up for questions now. We've gotten quite a few submitted through the Q&A box. And I'll pass it off to Nicole now to start us off, but please, if you have other questions, keep sending them in.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, I'll answer some of the questions that came in while you were talking. First, there's a question about how the match requirement works. So there's a couple matching components to this award. Social Innovation Fund awards, all of them, to REDF and to their other intermediaries, need to be matched by the intermediary. So REDF has to actually match the Social Innovation Fund award. But then there's an additional match component, which is that all subgrantees must match the award that they receive from REDF through SIF. That match, I think there's a question that kind of asks, like, do we have to have it, on hand when we apply? So it's not necessarily a match of like cash that you have on hand when you submit the LOI. Typically for our programs, what counts as match is revenue to the social enterprise. So for example, if you have a social enterprise that has several $100,000 of revenue, earned revenue already, or could have millions of dollars of earned revenue, or $1 million, whatever, if your grant is $200,000 and you've got $1 million of revenue coming in annually for your social enterprise, your earned revenue would more than cover the match for the grant. And it does need to be matched year for year. So it's a match requirement for all 5 years of the program. You can also use non-government philanthropic dollars for your match if for whatever reason you'd like to do that rather than use earned revenue, or if you are just starting up a social enterprise and so you don't have earned revenue that is sufficient to meet your match. Philanthropic dollars of all kinds except federal government can be used. So federal government dollars, even if they're passed through county or state or local, are not allowed to count as match. Dollars from individuals, from foundations, et cetera, do count as match. And it's not really cash on hand. It's revenue that comes in the same time period that you have your grant for. We also have a question about faith-based organizations. Faith-based organizations are eligible to apply. They must meet all of the same eligibility requirements that other applicants meet. So for example, they must have 501c3 status. There's a question about accessing the Mathematica job study statistics. Absolutely, the entire report is actually is available online, but there's also a quick fact brief. Go to redf.org/MJS, standing for Mathematica Job Study. That's redf.org/MJS, and you can access the fact brief and the entire report. Illinois does count as the Midwest. Also a question about training. What if we train and place people, but we don't actually employ individuals via a social enterprise? Unfortunately, no, that sort of a program is not a fit for this funding opportunity. We recognize there's a lot of great training programs, vocational programs, that do great work, but it's not a fit for this particular SIF portfolio, which is to fund social enterprises who employ individuals who otherwise would not be able to receive employment or maintain employment elsewhere. One question is can a nonprofit for-profit hybrid apply? Who sent in that question, you may want to send us in a little bit more information. So if it's a B Corp, that's a for-profit and is really not eligible for this opportunity, what we've told others is, REDF has other opportunities to make grants and make investments. And so if you'd like to, the LOI is very brief, so if you'd like to submit it and just let us know, what you're doing and that you're a B Corp and, that you're out there, it doesn't hurt to let us know that you're out there and make us aware of your program, and you're sort of part of our pipeline then and potentially eligible for other opportunities, and we would reach out to you about those. But you wouldn't technically be invited to put in the RFP or continue forward in this process if you're a for-profit. So, but the question about hybrids, I would want a little more information about what that means. So the applying entity must be a 501c3. If you're a 501c3 and maybe you have several fully owned subsidiaries that are for-profit, like housing entities or social enterprises, that's fine. The entity that's applying would be the 501c3. There's a question about if we don't make it through to the portfolio, can we still access the FARBR interns? That's a great question. Historically, the answer has been no. We paused the FARBR intern program for 2015, and we're currently re-envisioning the kind of re-rollout of that program next year. And one of the things we're talking about is how we do make FARBRs available to people outside our portfolio. So that is something that very well may happen in the near future, but historically they've only been for organizations in our portfolio. We have a question about are startups eligible to apply? Startups are absolutely eligible to apply. The question says, what if we're a startup but we're going to be launching within a certain number of months? So even if you're not launching within a certain number of months, that's fine. You're still eligible to apply. Couple things to think about in terms of our framework for evaluation of the applications. We want to see organizations that are going to be able to be employing, about 75 to 100 people a year on average by 2020. And it doesn't, we're going to have some organizations that employ hundreds, and so that means we have the ability to work with some organizations that have smaller programs, because the 75 to 100 per year is an average for REDF that we need to kind of manage across the entire portfolio. But if your growth plan is, we're going to have zero, we're a startup, and so we're going to launch in year 2, and we're going to have 0 people through years 1 and 2, and then we may have 20 by year 5, those are the sort of numbers that are probably not going to be competitive. But if you have a startup where you think your ramp up can happen quickly enough that you can be employing a decent number of people, then that's fine. And then we're additionally going to look at feasibility. And so if you haven't had any experience with social enterprise, you'll really want to make sure you call out what is it that you have, what are the assets or talents at your organization that you have in place that would help us believe you're going to be feasible in starting up this venture. We also have a question, is it possible to speak directly with someone at REDF about your program and see if it fits? Unfortunately, the answer is no. It's not something that we would be able to offer to all potential applicants, and so we really can't offer it to anyone. The reason we're doing these webinars is because we want to make sure that anytime we answer a question, that question and answer is available to everyone, everywhere. One question has to do with, is there a max funding amount, and are there stipulations on what you can fund? There technically is not a max funding amount. I mean, I think we said generally that the range will be between $100,000 and $400,000 per year. So we laid out a max of $400,000 per year per organization. I think that actually is negotiable. If we really needed to fund higher than that and it was really warranted, we could. But what we laid out in our application to SIF is that awards would be in the $100,000 to $400,000 range. SIF does actually require that awards are no less than $100,000. So there is a hard minimum, and that's the annual award. We make 1 year of funding award at a time, and it's renewable every year for up to 5 years, but you don't have to apply again. And then as far as stipulations on the funding, of course there's going to be some stipulations on the funding, but generally speaking, we look at what your program needs, and we talk on a case-by-case basis about, what to fund. We are able to fund staff positions at your social enterprise or at your parent agency potentially if they're working on things like job development or employee supports or training for your social enterprise. We are also able to fund wages of your social enterprise employees. We are able to fund some indirect and administrative costs for your social enterprise, and we're able to fund various different things on the business growth or employee support side as well. As far as indirect costs, just FYI, if you have a federally approved indirect cost rate, we will honor that. Otherwise, it's just determined on a case-by-case basis what is reasonable and appropriate for your organization to charge. Karen, those are the ones that I jotted down while you were talking. Do you want to take over the next batch?
Sounds great. Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks.
So one question that we got is if this year is the only opportunity to apply for this round of SIF funding, or if there will be other opportunities next year and beyond. We are aiming to fill the portfolio this year, although we reserve the right to potentially open up another round in following years, but we can't guarantee that, and so we do encourage groups to apply this year. Somebody else had a few questions. One, if you don't accept any government funding or state funding, are you still eligible? And you absolutely are. There's no requirement that you currently accept government funding, but you do, of course, need to be able to be eligible to accept government funding. The other question is if we are interested in enterprises that are employing in the U.S. and other countries or only the U.S. The jobs that we're interested in are the jobs in the U.S. And so when we talk about people employed numbers, we're really talking about individuals who are employed within the United States. That being said, if you're an enterprise that's employing lots of people in both the United States and in other countries, that's fine. You just need to also be able to legally operate in the United States. And we did take out the minimum years of eligibility, and there is no maximum number of years of eligibility. So if you've been operating for hundreds of years, that's absolutely fine. And there's really, you don't have to think too much about how long your organization has been in operation, basically. There's a question on if you're a current REDF grantee, if you can still apply, and the answer is yes, you can. You do have to specify how your proposed growth plan or project is different from what REDF is currently funding, and actually how it's different from any Social Innovation Fund funding that you've gotten in the past. That is a requirement of the Social Innovation Fund. There is a question on apparently on the LOI, there's a question on, if your organization is a chapter or member of a larger network, and if this is something that only applies to formal or legal memberships. And no, that's not the case. You can tell us about really any network, formal or informal, that you're part of. It doesn't have to be like a special legal entity or anything like that. We have a question that's come in on whether or not Tennessee counts as the South, and yes, we would consider that to be in the South. There's another question on whether the 75 to 100 jobs created means each year or over the whole grant period. And again, that was an average for each year across the whole grant period. So, it does mean by the end of the grant period, we would hope to see 400 to 500 jobs created in total. And of course, in the beginning of the grant period, you may be producing less than that, and then by the end of the 5 years, you may be producing far more than 100 jobs, and that 75 to 100 was just an average. That being said, it's not a hard and fast number. It's kind of what we calculated as, what we would need on average to be able to achieve our own goals for the Social Innovation Fund grant. This is what we would need to see from our grantees, but there'll be a lot of variation in groups, and some will produce a lot more than this average, and some will produce less than this average. So we do encourage everyone to submit, even if they're not sure they can achieve that specific number. And we do count only the jobs that are created within the social enterprise. And it's really each person who's employed. So if it's a job slot that's transitional, then maybe multiple people fill that job slot within a year, and each person would count for a job. But we aren't counting the placements after the person transitions out of the social enterprise. However, that is a very important metric to us, and we are very interested in understanding how groups are doing in terms of their post-social enterprise placement. So that is a key piece of what we consider success in a social enterprise, but it's not one of the numbers that counts within the jobs created figure. And there's a question on if it can be a mix of internal and external job placements through a transitional employment model. And again, if it's if the person is getting paid, by your social enterprise and they're placed at another organization, it's almost like a staffing agency type model. That certainly does count as being a placement or a job created. If it's a person that was employed at your social enterprise and then they've graduated from the social enterprise and you place them in a full-time job or part-time job elsewhere, that's not, unfortunately, something we can count as a job created. So maybe another way to think about it is unique individuals that are being placed into a job. There's a question on if you can apply if you support a collaborative and nonprofit organizations that are seeking to hire individuals and support their organizations. And the answer is if this larger entity of who's interested in applying and who is housing the collaborative of nonprofit organizations is also a nonprofit, then you certainly are eligible to apply. We do want just the parent entity to be applying, and it's just one application to cover the full collaborative. But the applicant has to be a 501c3. And actually, we did have another question on if agencies are limited to one proposal, and the answer is yes. If you have multiple social enterprises or multiple ideas, we ask that each agency submit only one application and detail the multiple social enterprises or multiple growth plans within that one proposal. And the last couple before I pass it back to Nicole. There is, again, the question of whether or not you have to have 501c3 status to apply, or if you can be a nonprofit public benefit corporation. That we may need to check into. I believe because it is government funded that it needs to be a 501c3 status, but we will double check if a nonprofit public benefit corporation also counts. And the question on whether or not funding can cover payroll for participants, yes, absolutely. This is a frequently used source of our funds. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to you, Nicole.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, I think you already addressed the one that there is a maximum of one proposal allowed per organization. I also want to address a question about whether or not current grantees can apply. So you mentioned that they do need to specify how what they're applying for is different than what we funded in the past. I just want to add on to that by saying part of what you can explain as far as being different is it can be the same social enterprise. It can be, the same program that you received REDF SIF funding for or other SIF funding for. But if that's the case, you have to explain either A, what you're working on in terms of what you're trying to improve. So is it like you're really trying to improve like vocational training opportunities? You're really trying to improve the number that like are retained outside when they transition? Like what is it that you're doing differently to improve on the outcomes from the prior round? Or how much new growth you will achieve for this social enterprise because of this round that wasn't achieved last time. So new real growth, like new job slots created, or programmatic improvements, but you will want to be detailed about it. Like you can't just say, well, we're going to improve on the way we do things. We want to really understand what is it you're trying to improve on and why, and how are you going to try to improve on it. We also have a couple questions about do jobs need to be full-time. So jobs in the social enterprise do not need to be full-time hours to count as a job for REDF and for SIF. In fact, many times they aren't because 40 hours of work does not leave time for people to, go to various appointments or check-ins or childcare things. Or training opportunities, et cetera, that they need to attend. So we frequently see hours that range between 20 and 40 hours a week. But usually if it's a program where it's 20 hours a week, it's also because there's mandated coursework on another day a week, for example. And so there's really a range. We just want to understand, what you do. And a similar question had to do with saying, you saw that there was something in our selection process guidance that showed 32 hours per week over a 4-week minimum. So that doesn't have to do with a minimum number of hours worked. So what that was in the last SIF portfolio, we had to figure out a way to say, well, what minimum number of total hours does it take to count someone as a person employed for our 2,500 goal? Like if someone literally worked 1 hour and then disappeared, do we count them for our 2,500? And we came up with a goal with SIF that said, in order to count, an individual has to work a total of 32 hours over a period of 4 weeks. So So it could be 32 hours in 1 week, or it could be 8 hours a week over 4. And if they met that goal, we would count them as employed. But obviously, it's a very low dosage of work. None of our portfolio have programs that are designed to be that small of a portion. But part of it is we also want to understand how many people are working that amount, and then we're losing track of them. As far as what we're going to use to count someone for this next round, that has yet to be determined. But just for the sake of just, kind of having an evaluator and being consistent, we will have to set some guidelines, such as they will count as a person employed if they have worked X hours over X period. But there's no minimum, like 32 hours per work minimum a week in order to count as a job. There's a question about, can we please confirm that federal funds can be used as match? So federal funds are the only thing that cannot be used as match. And the reason is that these are federal funds that are being passed through to you. They need to be matched by non-federal sources. You can't match federal with federal. You can use earned revenue, you can use individual donations, you can use foundation donations, you can use program revenue from another program. The only thing you cannot use is federal dollars. And we have a question, will you receive feedback on your LOI if it isn't accepted? No, we are not providing any sort of feedback to LOIs from that stage. Karen, do you want to take the next batch?
Sure, I can take a few more and then we'll pass it back to Natasha to wrap up. There's a question on if a person is placed at our social enterprise but paid for by a placement agency or other organization, and I believe as long as the job is created by your social enterprise, that should and they're getting paid at least minimum wage and working the hours in your social enterprise, that should be fine. There's a question on if the grant funds can be used to establish or set up a transitional employment program, as well as being used as wages and training funds for participants. And yes, those are all acceptable uses of funding. So you can, if you have a social enterprise that isn't necessarily a transitional employment model right now, you can certainly use the funds to convert your enterprise into being a transitional model. You can also use it for wages and training as well as other things. There's a question on whether you have to be willing to accept or receive government or state funding to be eligible. Just to be clear, the Social Innovation Fund money is government money, so you become a federal grantee or subgrantee once you receive this, or if you do receive this funding. And I guess the last question before I pass it on to Natasha is just some clarification around the feedback aspect. We are not actually able to provide feedback on full proposals either, nor the LOIs, unfortunately. But we are required to post to the proposals of the groups that make up our final portfolio, so you can always take a look at those and sort of understand what we looked for in those proposals. And then, Natasha, I'm going to pass it back to you to wrap up.
Thanks, Karen. I'll now go over several ways you can get involved with REDF and our work at large. SC for Jobs is a national community of over 400 members, employers, funders, thought leaders, and social enterprise supporters with a common goal of creating employment opportunities for those with barriers to employment. SC for Jobs aims to enhance learning opportunities and networking opportunities among social enterprises. Membership is free. SC for Jobs will host a membership appreciation breakfast at the Social Enterprise Alliance Summit in Denver on Friday, September 18th. To inquire more about SC for Jobs or the breakfast in Denver, email SC for Jobs as shown on the screen. For those dialing in, that's SE4jobs@redf.org. The Social Enterprise Alliance is a leading membership organization in the U.S. for social enterprises. As stated before, they will be hosting their annual summit this month in Denver. Among the exciting panels at the SCA Summit, be sure to check out the panel featuring REDF staff. Building sector-based social enterprise networks for greater impact, making the case, investing in social enterprise that pays, and lastly, using human-centered design to empower women in social enterprise businesses. Lastly, REDFworkshop.org is a platform for tools, best practices, and the shared experience of people working to create employment opportunities for those who face barriers. Resources include articles, videos, interviews, and member and org profiles. Join today to get access to a guided tool suite and a searchable user directory. Once again, thank you for joining us today. It was our pleasure to host this call. We hope that the information was helpful as you consider and encourage others to submit a letter of intent. Again, any remaining questions can be sent to CIF2015@redf.org. That's CIF2015@redf.org. Finally, please take a few minutes to fill out a survey that will appear on your screen after you exit the call. We'd really like to obtain your feedback. We hope you have a great day. Thank you.